The story of human consciousness during surgery begins in silence, in a place where science and mystery meet. When the lights of the operating room glow softly against sterile walls, and machines breathe in rhythm to support fragile bodies, the great puzzle of the mind quietly unfolds. It is in these rooms, beneath bright lamps and between the sounds of measured heartbeats, that men and women must surrender their awareness to medicine, drifting into a sleep not chosen, but carefully given. This sleep is unlike the natural slumber that visits us each evening, gentle and unannounced. It is a sleep designed, created by careful doses and precise intentions, meant not only to still the body, but to hush the conscious mind. From the very beginning of modern medicine, people have wondered what truly happens in those moments when the brain is muted by unseen chemicals, when thought becomes distant, and the sense of self fades like smoke. Do we cease to exist for a time, or do we continue observing from behind a curtain, waiting quietly in the wings of existence? There is a strange calm that enters the mind when imagining that state, a calm that is not without its unease. We understand what it means to fall asleep in our own bed, supported by the comfort of familiar surroundings, knowing we may dream or stir, and easily return to the waking world whenever morning comes. But in the world of surgery, the sleep is different, deeper, and it carries with it not familiarity but trust. The patient must trust the doctor, the anesthesiologist, the machines that monitor each breath, to guide them into another world and to return them safely. This leap of faith has been repeated countless times, across millions of bodies, across centuries of medical progress, and yet the deepest core of the experience remains shrouded. Even now, with all the technology at our hands, science cannot answer with complete certainty what consciousness is, let alone where it goes when anesthesia takes hold. The mystery of this state grows more fascinating as we remember that for much of human history, there was no such escape. Surgery before the discovery of anesthesia was a realm of pain, of cries echoing in echoing halls, of fear so sharp that it cut as deeply as the surgeon's blade. People were forced to endure every sensation, every incision, with nothing but courage and desperation. In those times, the very thought of silencing the body's awareness without ending its life would have seemed like a true miracle. When ether was first introduced in the 19th century, it was indeed described as such, a wondrous opening into a world where pain could vanish, where the body could be still while healing was attempted. The operating table became a different place altogether, and the patient's struggle was transformed. Yet as wondrous as this invention was, it carried within it new questions, for it was not simply that pain had been removed, but that the essence of self, the intimate flame of consciousness, had been quieted in a way that no one could explain. Consciousness has long been the silent companion of existence, the unseen witness to our every thought. We know the heart beats, the lungs draw in air, yet the awareness that perceives these actions is something far harder to pin down. Philosophers for millennia have asked what it means to be conscious, what it means to be aware of being aware. In daily life, we take this miraculous presence for granted, as though awareness were no more remarkable than air, until a moment arrives when awareness slips, drifts, or is forcibly dimmed. When a patient lies on a table and anesthesia begins its invisible work, consciousness does not end in a way we can measure like a light switched off. Instead, it recedes, sliding into a hidden crevice, partially known, partially imagined. The brain under anesthesia still hums, neurons still fizz with tiny electric sparks. Not all activity ceases, the body continues its fragile dialogues within itself. Breathing may be assisted, rhythms controlled, yet deep inside the brain, something more complicated remains. Patterns shift, senses fade, but the debate persists: is the person simply unconscious, or are they somehow watching from behind a veil, unable to speak yet still present? This question fuels countless stories from patients who emerge from operations speaking of strange experiences, echoes of sound, flickers of voices, or a heavy pressure pressing down that made them aware of their own helplessness. In the most vivid accounts, some describe floating beyond their bodies, perceiving the entire room with uncanny detail, as though their very essence had slipped its biological anchor. When listening to these testimonies, one cannot avoid a shiver of wonder. Could it be that human consciousness exists beyond the limits of biology, that the self somehow detaches when the body is subdued by science? Or are these simply illusions, fragments of the brain firing random signals in its medicated haze? Science and spirituality converge at this crossroad, each proposing answers yet neither laying claim to certainty. And it is here that the mystery deepens, stretching endlessly between careful measurements and whispered beliefs. For those lying still under surgical lights, drifting into that engineered silence, the question is not one of philosophy, but of survival. They ask with their surrender, will I return the same, and what part of me continues on while everything else falls quiet? To enter this state is to hover between worlds. The operating room becomes a stage of contradictions. Machines hum in precision, hands move with skill, time ticks by in orderly sequence. Yet within the quiet interior of the patient's being, what occurs is unknown. The mind either dissolves into nothingness or retreats secretly to some inner place. Patients rarely recall this transition. One moment they are listening to a doctor's calm instructions, and in what feels like the next, they wake up in recovery, hours vanished as though stolen. To most, this is a mercy, but to a few, fragments return with startling clarity. Imagine the sensation of hearing faint words, muffled as though spoken from underwater, yet being unable to open your eyes. Imagine feeling the tug of movement on your skin, the shifting of your body, without the ability to cry out or resist. These fragmented experiences, rare though they may be, suggest that not all consciousness is silenced, that perhaps awareness lingers at the edge, even as science assures us of complete unconsciousness. And even if the chances are slim, the possibility itself unsettles the boundaries of what we believe awareness to be. What is most intriguing is how natural sleep compares to this state. In ordinary slumber, we still dream. Our minds create stories, images, landscapes filled with people, sometimes vivid, sometimes fleeting. Sleep is not total silence, it is another kind of consciousness, a shifting, surreal theater within the mind. Under anesthesia, however, dreams often fall away. Time disappears entirely. The self is suspended in what feels like a void, neither dreaming nor reflecting. For hours the brain becomes an empty stage, and when the curtain rises again, it is as if nothing happened in the middle at all. Yet if even a trace of awareness survives during this void, if even the faintest glimmer of self remains awake beneath the silence, the meaning of consciousness itself requires re-examination. As we contemplate this, the scene comes gently into focus for those listening in the quiet of their rooms. Imagine the steady rhythm of medical devices, the distant murmur of voices speaking softly over a resting patient. Imagine the passage between realities, from wakefulness to surgical sleep, and picture the self drifting, untethered, on a current that no human hand can fully map. The body is still, but where is the mind? Is it gone, or simply watching from a place we cannot see? The questions rise and fall like waves, carrying the mind into calm waters where thought itself begins to loosen and fade. No matter how advanced technology grows, no matter how precise the science of anesthesia becomes, the core mystery remains. We cannot yet capture awareness in a vial, weigh it on scales, or chart its exact path. The mystery of consciousness is perhaps the last frontier of human understanding, existing in that space between science and wonder. And so the story begins here, in the willingness of human beings to trust, to surrender their selves for healing, and to find that in doing so they have pressed themselves against the very edge of the question, what does it mean to be conscious, and what does it mean to let that consciousness go? The silence of the operating room today gives little hint of the long and painful history that preceded it. For thousands of years, before the discovery of methods to ease awareness and numb sensation, human beings endured surgery in its rawest form. To imagine such scenes requires a slow breath, as the reality is both sobering and strange. A patient summoned courage, not expectant of comfort, but merely resigned to face the unbearable. In ancient times, healers did what they could to lessen the agony. They pressed herbs into trembling hands, poured wine into anxious mouths, burned incense or crushed opium into bitter drinks, hoping the smoke or drink might cloak the mind in shadows. Yet the effect was slight, uneven, and uncertain. Pain often surged through completely, like an unstoppable tide, overwhelming body and spirit alike. Ancient surgeons learned their trade not in quiet, sterile theaters, but in chambers filled with cries, with the struggle of bodies held down by others, with the desperate pleadings of men and women who trusted in healing yet could not escape their suffering. Accounts from ancient civilizations recall patients biting down on sticks, gripping the arms of companions who restrained them, their eyes wide, knowing every moment would be lived in sharp awareness. The body might be healed, a wound stitched or a limb set, but the mind left behind scars even deeper than the flesh itself. Pain was both a test and a punishment, something that no healer could ever truly remove. As centuries passed, experimentation with remedies grew. Folk traditions across the world discovered plants with calming properties. Poppy, mandrake, and cannabis were whispered to lull the senses, to draw the mind into a haze away from raw pain. In China, certain mixtures of wine and herbal extracts were prepared for operations, while in Greece, early physicians noted the strange effect of mandrake roots, which seemed to slow awareness, though often dangerously close to slowing the heart as well. In South America, the leaves of coca were chewed, offering a dim resistance to discomfort and fatigue. Yet though such discoveries hinted at the possibility of easing suffering, none were reliable enough to open the doorway to deep, controlled unconsciousness. Surgeons continued to operate in a climate of dread, balancing their skills against screams and struggle. The progress of human courage, however, never paused. Surgeons of the Middle Ages and Renaissance era began to refine their techniques, limiting the time of exposure, moving their hands with speed, efficiency, precision honed by necessity. To be a surgeon was to move swiftly, not only for success of the operation but for the mercy of shortening agony. Instruments were sharpened, methods reshaped, the human hand driven to mastery not only by curiosity but by compassion. Still, mastery could not outrun suffering. Pain was there, every time, a constant companion reminding patient and healer alike of human limitation. When whispers of new possibilities began to circulate in the early 19th century, they carried with them the sound of hope long deferred. In lecture halls and apothecary shops, curious substances were being studied. Scientists inhaled vapors, at first for amusement, not for medicine. Nitrous oxide, the so-called laughing gas, spread widely in social gatherings, making people lightheaded and giddy, producing sensations of warmth, laughter, and even dreamlike detachment. What began as entertainment soon sparked questions. If the mind could be altered so completely by vapor, could pain also be subdued? Could a more profound silence of awareness be reached? Enterprising surgeons began tentative experiments. They noticed that those who inhaled gases felt less pain, less fear, even during accidents or injuries. But controlling the depth, duration, and safety of such effects remained a vast challenge. Ether soon followed as another substance of deep fascination. Its sweet-smelling presence masked awareness with a peculiar clarity. When inhaled in controlled form, people seemed to drift away, eyes closing, bodies loosening. In this strange condition, the knife could fall without causing screams. And yet, at first, the idea seemed almost unbelievable. How could a patient be truly cut open and not cry out? Could the mind truly be quieted in such a way without extinguishing life itself? Witness accounts from the earliest demonstrations read like miracles. Imagine the scene: a crowd of doctors gathered in an amphitheater, their skepticism ripe, their arms crossed, eyes sharp with doubt. Upon the table lies a patient braced for pain. Ether is delivered, inhaled, drifting into the lungs. Slowly, the patient calms, movements less tense, tension in the eyes fading. The surgeon begins. Steel presses into flesh, and silence. No cry, no wrenching of muscles, no desperate thrashing. The audience stirs, astonished. This is not the familiar theater of agony, but something entirely new, almost impossible to believe. A new era had been unlocked, a gate opened between medicine and the deepest mystery of the mind. The rapid spread of ether became a sensation. Newspapers carried stories of painless surgeries. Patients who would once dread operations now approached with cautious hope. Yet alongside the marvel came unease, for the questions multiplied. If pain could be erased by vapor, what else was being erased? Was consciousness merely a fragile vapor itself, one that could so easily be snuffed? Religious figures pondered whether this sudden ability to turn off awareness infringed upon spiritual territory, touching the very soul. Scientists debated the mechanism. Was it nerves numbed? Was it chemical magic? Or was it an unseen doorway into the mind's secret architecture? Chloroform soon entered the stage with equal force. Easier to administer, potent in its effect, it was hailed as an improvement and yet feared for its dangers. For while the patient seemed merely to sleep, hidden risks lurked. Some never awakened, their hearts undone by the chemical embrace. The balance between promise and peril was delicate, and every hospital knew both triumph and tragedy as anesthesia spread. Yet the desire to harness this new power was unstoppable. Surgeons could now operate not in haste but with deliberation, exploring deeper aspects of the body, attempting techniques once unimaginable. Human consciousness, once the greatest obstacle to surgery, had been subdued. The transformation of medicine was immense. Hospitals changed atmosphere entirely. Where once cries and groans rang out, now silence reigned, punctuated only by the focused instructions of professionals and the steady hum of equipment. The doctor's ability to enter the body without bringing unbearable pain reshaped attitudes toward illness, toward healing, toward the possibilities of survival. An entirely new landscape of medicine unfolded, with risks that still remained but with doorways now open to levels of intervention previously unthinkable. At the same time, the experience of the patient reached new psychological depths. To entrust oneself to unconsciousness, to accept that one's awareness would be removed by another's hand, was an act of surrender unlike any other known in history. No longer braced against agony, patients instead face something perhaps subtler but just as daunting, the willingness to drift into a realm from which they might not return. Lying beneath the mask, breathing in the invisible vapor, the question pressed heavily: where exactly does one's self go in that instant? The narratives that followed this breakthrough began to collect. Some patients woke with no memory, no sensation of passing time. Others awoke shaken, recalling fragments of odd dreaming, or feeling as though deep conversations had taken place in spaces unknown. A few returned reporting terrifying impressions, sensations of being trapped in silence, unable to move though consciousness had stirred. What had been hailed as a miracle now revealed itself to hold mysteries and shadows within itself. Pain had been conquered, yet the dimensions of awareness remained elusive. As the decades stretched into the 20th century, techniques improved. Measurements of dose became more precise, equipment more sophisticated, the field of anesthesiology born as its own discipline, demanding mastery of both chemistry and human physiology. Doctors learned how to balance medications, how to keep patients suspended in controlled unconsciousness while watching closely every heartbeat, every breath. The profession stood at the intersection of life and oblivion, never fully stepping into death, yet always guarding the doorway. Still, no matter the science applied, the riddle persisted: what, at its essence, is consciousness, and how does anesthesia hold it? The voices of scientists and philosophers echoed against one another, attempting to penetrate the quiet enigma. Some argued the brain was a machine, and chemical intervention simply blocked its signals, scrambling communication so completely that awareness flickered off. Others suspected there was more, something intangible, something less easily dismissed. They spoke of layers of awareness, hidden states beneath full consciousness, accessible even when surface thought was quieted. Their arguments found unexpected support in patients who recalled, against all scientific prediction, fragments of sound, sensation, or vision while supposedly unconscious. The historical unfolding of anesthesia illustrates more than a medical triumph, it illustrates humanity's confrontation with the boundaries of self. To silence pain was an achievement, but to silence awareness opened an abyss of deeper implications. Were we discovering a trick of matter, or were we brushing against the core mystery of existence? The deeper anesthesia burrowed into medicine, the more it revealed about the fragility of the self we so often take for granted. The journey from cries of ancient rooms to the serenity of contemporary operating theaters is therefore not simply a timeline of science, but a slow and haunting meditation on identity. Slowly, we began to realize that the body and the mind, though intertwined, might not always remain in perfect alignment under the gaze of modern medicine. When one drifts away into medical sleep, the surgeons continue their work, hands careful, deliberate, precise. Yet somewhere, hidden beneath layers of chemistry and silence, the question remains alive: what has been silenced merely biology, or the whole essence of being? It is here that history and philosophy converge once more. Our ancestors, desperate to ease suffering, had already speculated that the spirit itself might travel when the body was subdued, that the soul might drift when drugs or herbs dimmed the flame of ordinary thought. Now, in modern hospitals, beneath sterile lights and delicate machines, those same questions breathe again, dressed not in ritual but in science. The mystery that once lived in temples and fires now lives in laboratories and operating theaters, yet it is the same question, softly pulsing through centuries. What is consciousness, and can we ever truly command it? When we reflect upon the history of anesthesia and the silence it brought into rooms once filled with suffering, we begin to feel the depth of the question that still waits, like a presence just beyond reach. It is not enough to know that the body becomes still, or that the cries of pain no longer echo. What lingers beneath all the comfort medicine provides is the mystery of what happens to the mind when it is silenced. For though the body is obvious to measure, the mind is precarious, fluid, shifting through shadows the way currents slip beneath the surface of a calm river. In surgery, as anesthesia folds over awareness, the layers of human thought seem to peel away one by one, until something at the very core either vanishes or retreats into impossible secrecy. In ordinary life, consciousness seems solid. We open our eyes, and the world is there. We hear music and recognize its tone, we remember our names and feel our emotions rise with a mixture of familiarity and surprise. Yet neuroscience has long revealed that what feels solid is woven from fragile threads. The brain is alive with electricity, billions of cells sharing sparks across synapses in endless waves. The orchestra of neurons gives rise to experience, yet each instrument in the orchestra plays such a fast, fleeting note that the song of the self seems to hover always on the edge of dissolving. When drugs alter this orchestra, suddenly the music changes. Sometimes it slows. Sometimes it falters. Sometimes it fades altogether into silence. But is the silence a true ending, or only the muffling of a melody played too faintly for our ears to catch? Anesthesiology offers us an opportunity to look directly at this haunting question. As drugs enter the bloodstream and rise toward the brain, consciousness begins to fold. First there may be relaxation, a sense of warmth spreading through limbs, a gentle softening of time itself. For many, the transition seems instant. The doctor speaks, and then in a blink, waking comes hours later. But beneath that apparent suddenness lies a passage, and within that passage lie clues to what consciousness really is. Scientists monitoring brain activity during anesthesia see waves shift. Beta rhythms, those chattering lines linked to alert wakefulness, begin to dim. Alpha rhythms, similar to those observed in meditative calm, shimmer then waver. Eventually, slow waves dominate, curves rising and falling like ocean swells drawn across an endless night sea. Yet occasionally, bursts of higher frequency sparks emerge in the middle of this sea, as though fragments of thought try to rise even in the chemical storm that sweeps through neurons. The experience of drifting into unconsciousness does not always mirror sleep, though the two seem outwardly similar. In normal sleep, cycles move across stages, light dozing, deep rest, and rich landscapes of rapid eye movement where dreams bloom in vivid colors. Under anesthesia, these cycles are disrupted. Dreams may not come in the same way. The corridors that appear in sleep, painted with memory and fantasy, are often absent. Instead, patients describe nothingness, a blank corridor where time is erased. It is as though the consciousness is paused, set aside, only to resume when the curtain of drugs is lifted. Yet some resurface with fragments so peculiar that they challenge the story of nothingness. A patient once spoke of hearing the tone of a machine and later recognized it exactly in the recovery room. Another recalled whispers, each word indistinct but undeniably present. Others described not words and sounds, but impressions, pressure, movement across skin, or the peculiar certainty of being watched. In still rarer cases, patients described the extraordinary, rising above their own body, watching the operation unfold, hovering beyond the reach of their nerves. Hospitals record such testimonies cautiously, yet consistently. Anesthesia, meant to quiet awareness, sometimes seems to simply veil it, leaving pieces exposed in the margins. And in those margins lies an enduring enigma. If consciousness can be veiled rather than erased, if parts of self remain in the shadows while others fall silent, then consciousness may not be a single thing but a spectrum. Perhaps what we think of as being fully awake is merely one layer, thin and precarious. Beneath it, other layers spread, layers that register sensation without shaping it into words, or layers that watch without judging, like silent witnesses. Some neuroscientists describe this with structures and circuits, pointing to thalamus and cortex, to regions that network together to weave perception. But philosophy listens differently, hearing in these stories the possibility that human awareness is neither centralized nor singular, but something diffused, something capable of fragmenting and still persisting. The layering of consciousness becomes even clearer when we realize how differently individuals respond to anesthesia. One person may sink instantly, eyes fluttering closed within moments, sinking into darkness so complete that no memory registers. Another might linger, retaining brief conversations, and only afterwards realizing they were already technically under. Some resist entirely, requiring greater doses, as though their awareness clings stubbornly to the surface. Why does consciousness behave differently in each of us, when the body seems so alike? Here, individuality reveals itself in the most intimate way, through the very manner in which our minds release their grip on self-awareness. Researchers attempt to chart these differences through electroencephalography, watching how waves shift across the scalp, or through brain scans where regions dim as chemistry unfolds. Yet when the brain darkens under anesthesia, the image we see is not absence but complexity. Patterns flicker like constellations dimmed by cloud cover, still alight beneath the veil. If there is still fire beneath this dimness, does it mean consciousness is not extinguished? Or does consciousness require more than fire? Perhaps it requires coordination, harmony between regions, conversation between circuits. If anesthesia silences communication, perhaps the orchestra of mind is not destroyed but scattered, its instruments isolated, each playing into deaf silence. To think of it in this way is to imagine awareness as fragile dialogue. You are not conscious simply because neurons spark. You are conscious because billions of neurons spark in great chorus, their voices intertwining until something larger rises from the mass. Under anesthesia, those voices are muffled, isolated into small meaningless solos. Without the chorus, the song of self vanishes. And yet, whenever fragments are recalled, sounds, pressures, out-of-body visions, it is as though one or two instruments broke through, echoing faintly even while the orchestra lay in pause. This is the paradox that continues to haunt both medicine and philosophy. If consciousness requires interaction, if awareness emerges only when brain regions speak together in harmony, then anesthesia may truly dissolve it, reducing mind to unstructured fragments. But what, then, explains the fragments that survive, the striking accounts of awareness that should not be possible? Unless, perhaps, awareness is less fragile than assumed, existing independently somewhere deeper, only dimmed by the chemical hush, but never destroyed completely. For patients, the experience always circles back to trust. To lie in the theater, surrounded by masked professionals and gleaming instruments, is to accept this leap into mystery. The patient cannot control the journey. Each moment is placed in the hands of others. They breathe in the invisible mist, feel their thoughts begin to dissolve, their grasp on the world slip like sand through fingers. And where their consciousness travels in those hours is unknown, hidden in depths where time itself has no dominion. Imagine yourself drifting back into sleep. Imagine the softness of thought as your awareness begins to fade. At first, you know where you are. You remember words just spoken. Then, gently, pieces fall away, the edges blur. Then the sense of body loosens, a hand that might no longer feel weight, a leg that fades into stillness. The last moments before anesthesia takes hold are said to be subtle, like standing at the very edge of a vast ocean in darkness. You know you are there, and then suddenly, you are not. The waves continue to move, but you do not feel them. The ocean stretches without end, yet your memory holds not even a drop of it. This crossing is too brief and too shrouded to grasp. For some, it will remain forever empty. For others, fragments of sound ripple back, like voices from the distance of a dream. For a few, visions emerge, as though some deeper part of the self remains untouched by chemicals. Where does this difference lie? What makes one mind vanish completely, another linger just enough to remember? Questions like these remain the great frontier questions that no machine, no measure, no imaging technology has fully resolved. The study of these layers of awareness has led scientists toward bold theories. Some suggest that consciousness is simply the flow of information, like data moving across a network. When anesthesia blocks this flow, awareness halts, much as cutting a wire halts electricity from reaching a light. Others suggest something stranger, that consciousness is more fundamental, a property of reality itself, not confined to neurons but channeled through them. In that view, anesthesia does not eliminate consciousness, it only disconnects the brain from it, like turning a radio dial away from a signal that still exists. The broadcast continues, but the receiver is muted. And so the mystery evolves. Each attempt to explain consciousness reveals more about its elusiveness. Just as we chart the body's systems with increasing precision, the mind remains a horizon always retreating. The drugs that silence it prove its fragility, yet the fragments that survive prove its persistence. Between fragility and persistence lies a riddle at the heart of being human. As this riddle unfolds, imagine the steady rhythm of a surgical monitor. Imagine the long exhalation of air through a breathing machine. Imagine the gentle hush in a room where lives hinge on silence. Beneath the lights, a patient lies in this in-between space, awareness folded but perhaps not gone. Outside the body, voices move, hands shape, instruments touch. Inside the mind, what remains? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe some trembling layer of awareness still lingers, like the echo of a dream you cannot quite remember upon waking. And so we are left listening, waiting, wondering, not simply about medicine but about ourselves. When you fall asleep tonight, when you drift off into your own private darkness, you will pass through shifting layers of awareness, slipping between dreams and silence. In surgery, the journey is taken for us, guided by the hand of science, yet still traversing lands unknown. What we meet in that passage is a reminder that even as technology grows, even as knowledge deepens, consciousness itself keeps its secrets. And while we breathe in the quiet narrative of healing, we realize the mystery of human awareness may be as endless as the silence between heartbeats. The silence that follows the descent into anesthesia feels, at first, impenetrable and absolute. For most, the experience is nothingness, a black corridor where time is suspended and the self simply waits beyond perception until the moment of awakening. But within this silence, hidden like a faint echo, there exist rare exceptions that stir unease not only in science but in the deepest corners of our imagination. In these cases, something remarkable occurs. The anesthesia does not fully silence the mind. It leaves, instead, threads of awareness intact. Awareness tries to rise, trapped inside a motionless body, unseen and unheard by those surrounding it. This is the strange, haunting phenomenon known as anesthesia awareness, and for those who have lived through it, it does not feel rare at all. It feels like eternity compressed into a moment, an eternity composed not of pain alone, but of helplessness, of being awake and silenced while the world continues without acknowledgement of the self. To picture such an experience is to step quietly into a paradox. A patient lies under the lights, surrounded by professionals who believe them to be safely unconscious. Drugs flow steadily into their veins, monitors record stable rhythms, all signs suggest the intended outcome has been achieved. Yet within the stillness, the mind has not fully dimmed. It flickers awake, registering sound, perceiving voices, catching the vibration of instruments. For some, sensation arises: the firm pressure of hands, the strange pull at skin and tissue, and, in rare and worst moments, pain itself. But what makes the experience profoundly unsettling is not just sensation, but the inability to move, the absolute paralysis that accompanies anesthesia. The patient cannot cry out, cannot lift a hand, cannot open their eyes to say, "I am here." The body has been silenced completely, but the mind still listens, still suffers, still watches from behind a locked door. Countless testimonies speak of the same central terror, being trapped. Patients describe floating in a kind of half-space. They hear words, the rhythm of instruments, but when they try to speak, nothing comes. When they try to shake, their body does not respond. This locked-in state creates a form of dread unlike any other, a pure realization that the body and self are utterly disconnected. Some recall praying, some recall collapsing inward, counting seconds in their mind and believing each moment would be the last. Later, long after the body heals, the memory of that paralysis often lingers more sharply than any physical wound. Post-traumatic stress follows these patients into sleep, where nightmares replay the helplessness again and again. And yet, not every story is shaded in terror. Some who have experienced partial awareness report curiosity rather than fear. They speak of overhearing conversations between doctors, of charting time by listening to music playing faintly in the background, even of constructing entire daydreams in silence while their body lay still. Some tell of pain that was muted, not sharp, more like an oppressive pressure than unbearable agony. Others, more mysteriously, remember floating away from the table, perceiving the surgery from a vantage outside of themselves. Whether interpreted as hallucination or out-of-body experience, such accounts complicate the boundaries between science and mystery. For doctors and anesthesiologists, these testimonies have always been troubling, for the aim of their art is precision, comfort, safety. To learn that, despite the most careful attention, a patient has remained awake in secret, enduring the procedure without the ability to alert anyone, is almost unbearable. It is difficult not to imagine the aftermath, to know that what appeared to be a perfectly controlled surgery may have left scars upon the mind that no scalpel cut. Because of this deep unease, research into anesthesia awareness has grown steadily, even though the cases remain rare. Studies attempt to quantify the frequency, perhaps 1 or 2 in every 1,000 surgeries, more common in certain types where lighter anesthesia must be given to maintain physical safety. Numbers comfort scientists by reminding them of rarity, but for one who has lived it, statistics mean little. The experience overwhelms its rarity with its intensity. The science behind anesthesia awareness is layered and complex. At times, the problem springs from the delicate balancing act between consciousness and safety. Certain patients, such as those with fragile conditions or compromised circulation, cannot receive full doses of anesthetic drugs without risking harm to the body itself. Doctors must keep them in lighter states of unconsciousness, vulnerable to fragments of awareness leaking through. In other cases, the metabolism of the drugs plays its role. The body processes them too quickly, flushing them away before the surgery concludes. Occasionally, mechanical issues can arise, delivery systems failing quietly without immediate detection. These explanations attempt to give order to what otherwise feels purely chaotic. Yet even with explanations, the phenomenon remains a haunting riddle, leaving scars that remind us knowledge cannot fully shield us from mystery. To dwell upon this is to reflect again upon the self. What exactly is happening when awareness persists in the face of chemical silence? Does this mean consciousness is more resilient, less easily extinguished than imagined? Does it suggest there are layers of mind that do not easily surrender, that remain vigilant even when the body is subdued? Or does it speak simply to the imperfect control of drugs, to an accident of chemistry and timing? In one view, anesthesia awareness is a flaw in a system that is usually reliable. In another view, it is evidence that consciousness cannot be eliminated so easily, that it waits quietly, stubbornly, until opportunity allows it to rise again. The accounts themselves offer strange hints. Often the most vivid recall is of sound. Patients remember overhearing phrases, conversations, instruments clinking onto trays. Sound seems to penetrate the veil more often than pain. Does this mean hearing is the last sense to fade, a thread linking the self to the world even when sight and speech have slipped away? Or is it simply that sound is the easiest memory to recall, leaving deeper, stranger sensations unspoken? Many researchers have studied brain activity to see which regions continue to process incoming signals while under anesthetics. They observe that the auditory cortex sometimes still hums faintly, suggesting that words and noises may slip through cracks in unconsciousness more often than we recognize. The emotional weight of these experiences cannot be underestimated. Awareness during surgery leaves many patients with lasting anxiety. They may refuse future operations, even when health demands them. They fear doctors, masks, the smell of antiseptic halls. Their minds replay the feeling of being trapped again and again, until sleep itself becomes difficult. For them, recovery is not solely physical, but deeply psychological, a process of learning to trust life again. Therapists describe patients who awake sweating from nightmares of suffocation, of shouting without sound, their bodies trembling as though still paralyzed, though awake in bed. The mind, once scarred by awareness during immobility, carries the wound like an invisible brand. Yet even within this darkness, there lies another side, a strange window into wonder. If even a fraction of consciousness survives the storm of anesthesia, what does that say about the endurance of human awareness? Could it be that the self never vanishes entirely, that somewhere in the network of neurons, a flame always smolders, however dim? If so, then perhaps awareness is less a fragile flicker, easily extinguished, and more a deep-rooted current, difficult to silence completely. If this suspicion holds, then anesthesia awareness is not purely accident but revelation, a glimpse into the persistence of the self against overwhelming quiet. In hearing such stories, philosophy inevitably returns to the conversation. Spiritual traditions might say that the event reveals the independence of the soul, which cannot be silenced by chemicals alone. Materialist scientists might argue instead that it is proof of the brain's intricate resilience, its refusal to fully shut down regardless of attempts. Between these two views spreads an expanse of mystery, and each patient's testimony lies like a pebble in its vast field. Perhaps both perspectives touch aspects of truth. Perhaps neither does fully. The study of anesthesia awareness is thus more than a medical question. It is a mirror held up to consciousness itself. We begin with rare events, with suffering, with reports of voices and vibrations, but when we follow their path, we arrive at a more universal reflection. How delicate is the line between being and not being? How slender is the bridge that carries thought from one moment to the next? When that bridge trembles and cracks during surgery, when awareness peers briefly through the silence, it reminds us of how much we do not know about our deepest selves. As you listen to these ideas, let your mind drift gently to the rhythm of the words. Imagine the faint beeping of monitors, each sound a sign that life pulses steadily on. Imagine the dim glow of surgical lamps, silver light falling on a quiet stage. Imagine a patient breathing carefully, machines whispering beside them. From within their silence, an unexpected awareness stirs. They hear. They feel. They remember. This is not horror alone but revelation. For in that remembering, we realize that consciousness is perhaps broader, stronger, and more elusive than expected. The darkness of anesthesia is vast, yet awareness sometimes glows faintly in its depths, the way fireflies shimmer in a moonless evening field. Rare, delicate, impossible to predict, and yet no less real for their rarity. Those who have endured and returned bring back with them reminders that our understanding of mind remains partial. They remind us that the self, fragile though it seems, resists eradication even by the most carefully designed tools. While doctors refine their methods, while scientists measure their data, the mystery continues to press forward, inviting us to wonder at the stubbornness of awareness itself. And so the gentle paradox grows deeper. Surgery exists to heal. Anesthesia exists to spare. Yet within that space designed for silence emerges the trembling voice of consciousness, whispering that it still lives, however faintly, beneath the imposed dark. We cannot know fully where it resides or why it sometimes endures, but we can know this: the human mind, resilient and mysterious, will not always submit to silence. It will sometimes shine through, offering both torment and awe, reminding us of the profound puzzle of being alive. The listener, drifting now in quiet thought, may let these reflections ease them toward calm. The rhythm of awareness and silence becomes itself a lullaby. Just as the patient drifts in and out of realms beneath the lamp, so too do we drift here, across questions that stretch wider than sleep, deeper than dream. And though answers may not come, the peace lies not always in answers but in listening, slowly, gently, to the mystery itself. There is a peculiar beauty in the fact that, even in the most carefully controlled silences of modern medicine, human experience still breaks through in surprising ways. Beyond those who have felt awareness without movement lies another group of witnesses whose stories reach into a stranger and more delicate realm. These are the individuals who, while lying silent beneath anesthesia, believe they have somehow stepped outside the borders of their bodies. Their testimonies describe something so uncanny that it unsettles the distinction between memory and dream, between physiological survival and what lies beyond. Out-of-body experiences during surgery remain as controversial as they are fascinating, but they invite us to listen closely, slowly, with the same patience we bring to the quiet edge of sleep. Imagine a patient opening their eyes in recovery, shaking, pale, and describing not only a memory of sound, not only a recollection of touch, but a description of what they saw while suspended beyond themselves. They speak of hovering above the operating table, watching the team move calmly around them, seeing their own body lying still, machines arching their mechanical arms as if in rhythm to some quiet music. They describe the flashes of metallic instruments being passed, the tilt of the doctor's head, even the design of a ceiling fixture they had never known existed, because their viewpoint was no longer confined to the still body below. For many listeners, these confessions inspire disbelief. How could eyes that were closed and paralyzed witness such detail? Yet the recounting persists, steady and persistent, growing over decades into a body of testimonies too numerous to dismiss outright. The phenomenon of out-of-body experiences, often abbreviated as OBE, has been written about in connection with near-death moments, with accidents, with sudden traumas where people describe leaving their bodies at the brink of survival. In operating rooms, however, these reports take on a special intensity, for here the body is controlled, sustained, medically observed in every detail. The patient should be unaware, unreachable. And yet they awaken with stories painted in striking imagery. Such accounts have been carefully logged, studied, sometimes quietly ignored, sometimes openly debated, always returning with stubborn determination that refuses exile. Some speak of floating, a gentle drift upward, feeling freed from the weight of flesh. They describe calm, curiosity, even serenity. Panic is rare in these memories. Much more common is a sense of watchfulness, a kind of silent observation without judgment. The person feels less like a participant in surgery and more like an invisible witness lingering at the ceiling, seeing a panorama of activity their eyes should not have been able to claim. Others venture even further. They describe moving not upward but outward, as though walls no longer bound them, their awareness slipping through architectural barriers, drifting into adjacent halls where they overhear conversations later verified as real, though supposedly impossible to perceive. Skeptics respond with caution, noting that the mind under anesthesia may hallucinate, that fragments of overheard sound may weave together into imagined pictures after the fact. They suggest that memory creates illusions, piecing together improbable images from subtle sensations remembered in distorted form. And perhaps, in many instances, that is true. The brain, deprived of normal function, often creates peculiar phantoms in dreams and delirium. But even so, some testimonies resist such neat explanations. Patients report specific details they could not have known, details confirmed by staff afterward. Such accounts keep the conversation open, a conversation that whispers not only about medicine but about the border where science meets the unknown. It is tempting to dismiss these moments as curiosities, but to do so would be to overlook their deeper implications. Out-of-body experiences pull back a curtain for those who live them. Having once seen themselves from beyond themselves, they awaken with new certainty that the self might not be confined entirely to the body. They speak with conviction of a division between flesh and awareness, between matter and essence. Many say that afterward they no longer fear death as before, for they have felt themselves continue in the absence of bodily control, freed from limitation. Whether or not one accepts their interpretation, the transformation in their lives is undeniable. They emerge altered, as though one glimpse into silence revealed more than years of conversation ever could. Philosophers have long entertained the possibility that consciousness could exist independent of the physical body. Spiritual traditions across the world echo the same music in different words: the soul, the spirit, the Atman, the subtle self. Out-of-body experiences, particularly those summoned by the unlikeliest of surroundings, a brightly lit, sterile operating room, seem to echo ancient claims in modern garb. But where philosophy and spirituality once sang freely about the soul, science treads carefully. Scientists ask, what if what people experience is not literal departure from the body but a trick of perception, crafted in the confused depths of the anesthetized brain? They suggest neurons misfiring, sensory inputs misassembled, memory stitched across impossibly timed gaps. Yet despite these careful explanations, the experiences resist dissolving into ordinary error. They remain too vivid, too detailed, too transformative. Perhaps truth lies hidden between perspectives. Perhaps the consciousness is not literally traveling but unfolding into modes we do not yet understand, perceiving the environment through hidden pathways still unknown to neuroscience. Or perhaps, as many who have lived it insist, the consciousness truly departs, observing the world through a perspective untethered to biology. Whatever the mechanics may be, the experiences serve a purpose. They remind us that the human mind cannot be boxed into final definitions, that every attempt to pin it down opens new mysteries waiting just beyond the attempt. When these patients lie under lights and describe afterward their soaring stillness above the table, we are invited into a meditation about the relationship between self and matter. Are we merely chemical processes, dissolving when signals cease? Or do we exist also in some subtler architecture, free to perceive against the odds, free to wander even when our bodies are closed down and guarded by anesthetics? To dismiss the question outright is to turn away from one of the most profound aspects of human existence, an aspect whispered through history from shamans, monks, mystics, and now from the mouths of individuals who never sought it yet found themselves changed forever. Listening to these testimonies with an open ear feels like peering across a horizon, a quiet landscape where known and unknown meet. The story does not rush, it drifts, unfolding with the same calm patience that patients themselves describe while floating above their own bodies. In this calmness, we learn to listen differently, not with skepticism or faith alone, but with a quiet recognition that mystery itself is a necessary companion to knowledge. Medicine explains much, but the human experience continues to speak beyond explanation. Machines tick gently, surgeons move with grace, the air is still with concentration. And somewhere in those suspended hours, an individual lies both silent and soaring, memory stitching an impossible vantage across the sterile room. Later, when their eyes open and they describe what they saw, what they felt, what they drifted through, we are reminded that awareness may always exceed what we predict. Perhaps it will one day be mapped and measured. Perhaps it will one day be dismissed as error. Or perhaps it will continue forever as a quiet enigma, reminding us in its persistence that living beings are far stranger than any theory can contain. For those listening now, imagine lying still, hearing whispers of movement, then feeling gently that your viewpoint no longer matches the still figure of your body. Feel yourself rising, looking down, calm, untroubled, seeing the world from above. Feel how vivid it is, how strangely natural. And then, just as silently, return, sliding back into your body, to awaken hours later with the memory imprinted upon you. Such is the persistent imagination called forth by these experiences, guiding thought into depths as still and vast as sleep itself. And so the gentle flow of reflection continues. Between scientific caution and spiritual wonder, out-of-body experiences during surgery beckon us into a dialogue about the essence of self. They suggest we are both fragile and enduring, bound by biology yet perhaps slipping past its borders in moments of upheaval. They remind us to listen carefully, softly, to each story with open curiosity, for within those stories lies a glimpse of what we cannot measure but cannot ignore. And as the thoughts flow, as the rhythm of awareness and unawareness ebbs like a tide, the listener drifts with them, carried slowly toward stillness, soothed by the possibility that there is more to us than flesh, more than neurons, more even than silence. There is always a place where questions outgrow the boundaries of one discipline and spill into the language of another. When we listen to testimonies of awareness under anesthesia or accounts of drifting out of the body in an operating theater, we arrive at such a place. Step by step, medicine has tried to draw maps of what is happening inside the brain when the physical body is subdued. But even as those maps gain precision, they never silence the echo of mystery that seems to defy them. Across history, this has been the fertile ground where science and spirituality find themselves staring at the same horizon from opposite shores, both compelled by the same question: what is consciousness, and what happens to it when the body sleeps under the weight of drugs? Scientists, cautious and deliberate, describe consciousness through circuitry. They speak of neurons, of chemical messengers, of dense networks of synapses that send information in shimmering cascades. They explain awareness as the brain's ability to unify streams of information into a coherent sense of self. To them, anesthesia interrupts this symmetry. It scrambles the message, silences the conversation between regions, isolates signals so that the great orchestra of the mind falls apart. In this view, anesthesia awareness or out-of-body sensation is explained as noise, fragments of a radio signal that sometimes break through static even when the broadcast has been turned down. Their language is precise, technical, focused on evidence that can be measured, recorded, and repeated. Spiritual voices, in contrast, describe consciousness not as an orchestra of matter but as a fundamental essence. They speak of soul, spirit, or subtle energy. They suggest that the body is not the origin of consciousness but its vessel, a temporary host where awareness lives for a time before continuing onward. To them, stories of awareness under drugs or visions of rising above the body are not accidents of malfunction but glimpses into the truth that awareness is greater than biology. For them, science may quiet, may numb, may even simulate oblivion, and yet the flame of consciousness persists beyond chemical reach. These two visions rarely meet in agreement, but they cannot help circling one another. The scientist may dismiss spiritual certainty as imagination, the spiritual thinker may dismiss scientific reduction as blindness. Yet both are stirred by the same testimonies, the same uncanny recollections of patients who return with memories science did not predict. It is here, in this overlap of curiosity and doubt, that the real mystery grows strongest. For neither side can fully claim victory. Each must admit that consciousness remains a phenomenon not entirely tamed. There are philosophers who attempt to weave bridges between these visions. Some suggest that consciousness may not be either material or spiritual in the narrow sense, but rather a field of experience that emerges from interaction between physical brain and something larger. They speak carefully, drawing analogies to light and wave, to patterns of resonance. Perhaps the brain is like an instrument tuned to receive consciousness, amplifying it into the rich, complex sound of selfhood. Anesthesia, then, would be like detuning the instrument, breaking it temporarily, so that music falters or halts. Yet the signal itself, in this vision, may never disappear, it continues beyond the broken instrument. Such bridges satisfy neither strict scientist nor strict mystic fully, and yet they persist because they allow room for both evidence and wonder to rest side by side under the same sky. When testimonies of awareness surface in the hallways of hospitals, the professionals are often torn. Some wish to label them wholly as errors, distortions, the malfunctions of neurochemistry under stress. Others listen more carefully, recognizing that the human mind has always carried secrets larger than equations can capture. For these cautious listeners, the testimonies become not embarrassing mistakes, but opportunities to glimpse the edge of a frontier where measurement trembles into awe. For patients who have lived through such visions, categorization often matters little. What remains for them is not a debate but a memory, as sharp and real as waking life. For some, it was an overwhelming terror, the realization of being trapped in silence. For others, it was a serene journey, a glimpse of floating away with no fear. Whatever the content, the memory changes them. They describe awakening into life differently, seeing relationships differently, sometimes even seeing reality itself differently. The scar or the blessing carved into them lies beyond argument. It is their truth, whether anyone else believes it or not. The presence of both science and spirituality around these experiences is in some sense inevitable. For the questions raised by anesthesia awareness and out-of-body perception are not small questions. They strike at the root of what it means to be alive. They touch the timeless mystery of who we are when every layer of the body is quiet. They lead us into the corridors of identity, selfhood, mortality. And whenever such questions appear, science and spirit will always be drawn, each carrying its own lens, each half-blinded without the other, each compelled even when they resist. Consider the experience of drifting in anesthesia again. Imagine scientists charting brain waves, electrodes tracing electrical patterns, graphs shimmering with curves that tell their story of silence descending. These lines say, neurons no longer speak to one another in the same complex tongue. Communication has faltered. And yet, at the same time, imagine a patient later reporting, I rose, I saw, I felt. I was there. One story is of silent signals. The other is of soaring spirit. To dismiss either is to lose something essential. To listen to both is to open oneself to the complexity of truth. Cultural differences color the interpretations, yet the experiences themselves carry striking similarities across the world. In some societies, those who return with visions are celebrated, told they caught a glimpse of a realm beyond. In others, they are studied clinically, their stories dissected and catalogued like specimens in a laboratory. In many places, the stories are quietly set aside, unmentioned, because they do not fit comfortably into accepted categories. But the silence of others cannot erase the experience of the one who lived it. And so, these stories travel, whispered, written down, shared at bedsides and conferences alike, slowly weaving a tapestry that defies dismissal. The operating theatre becomes strange under such reflections. A modern room, filled with light and precision, becomes at once sacred. A space of technology becomes a space of myth, where the human being confronts perhaps the deepest of mysteries while held utterly still. Whatever one believes about the nature of consciousness, the room is transformed by these possibilities. The steady rhythm of beeping monitors deepens into a rhythm of existential wonder, each heartbeat not only a sign of survival but a reminder of mystery. For listeners drifting into rest, it is important to know that whether science finds answers or spirit insists upon its truths, the mystery itself is precious. We need not grasp it fully to feel its calming power. We need only notice that in the borderlands between understanding and wonder, between measurement and dream, lies a quiet space that mirrors the border between wakefulness and sleep. To rest in that border is to rest in mystery, neither demanding control nor giving in to fear, but simply listening. Imagine again the darkness behind the eyelids of a patient. Imagine the slide into stillness, the soft sound of instruments, then the sudden expansion of perspective, drifting beyond, seeing a panorama that should not be possible. Imagine waking and carrying this memory not as nightmare but as strange gift, as touch from realms where words grow thin. Whether this gift is read as spirit or biology matters less than the awe it leaves behind. In awe, we find solace. In awe, we find the lull that guides us inward. Science will continue its studies, wires attached, monitors glowing. Spiritual thought will continue its meditations and prayers. Each will circle and argue, cautious and insistent. But the human heart, the human ear, the weary mind ready for rest, does not require resolution. It requires only the sound of waves meeting shore, questions echoing into night, mysteries arriving softly and unhurried. Such mysteries are not meant to be solved in one sitting. They are meant to lull, to cradle, to whisper that the universe still contains secrets, and perhaps we are among them. And so the debate between science and spirituality does not close, but opens. It opens wider, revealing new paths for thought, new corridors for dream. Whether consciousness is circuits or soul, whether awareness is silenced or enduring, the truth whispers quietly beyond both answers. To drift into that whisper is to drift into the same gentle silence we call sleep. In silence, the body gives the impression of being fully surrendered, as if every signal that once declared discomfort or resistance has been extinguished by the careful chemistry of the anesthesiologist. Yet consciousness, slippery and layered, does not always surrender so absolutely. Beneath the surface, fragments remain, and sometimes those fragments are painful. Long after the body has healed, when physical scars have faded into soft lines, the memory of something endured without voice or acknowledgement can still linger like a shadow pressed against the walls of the mind. This is where the hidden thread of pain weaves itself into the tapestry of consciousness and will not easily let go. The most haunting aspect of surviving awareness under anesthesia is not always the pain itself but the inability to speak of it while it unfolds. Imagine lying on a table, unable to move, unable to open the mouth, unable even to raise the flicker of an eyelid to signal the presence of life. Doctors and nurses work diligently nearby, believing they are protecting you with their craft, while in the locked chamber of your awareness you are screaming, unheard. The sense of helplessness stitches itself into memory with a permanence deeper than the pain of an incision. The body heals from wounds, but the mind continues to replay the terror of being trapped. For some patients, this encounter weaves itself into nightmares that recur for years. They wake in sweat, gasping, convinced they are once again powerless, that their lungs will not draw air, that their hands cannot move. They see surgical lights in their dreams, hear muffled voices, feel instruments they cannot resist. Post-traumatic echoes of these experiences persist long after recovery, shaping daily life. They create fear not only of hospitals but of sleep itself, for to sleep resembles too closely the silence of anesthesia, where one may again lose the ability to awaken at will. Others describe less overt but no less harrowing imprints. They recall intense pressure, as though a weight pressed heavily into their chest, crushing but not piercing. They remember an unshakable sensation of suffocation, of air slipping away from their grasp, though attendants monitored their breathing carefully. These sensations are difficult for science to catalogue. They are real in the experience of the patient, yet invisible to physical measures. Medicine assures safety, balance, oxygen saturation, steady heart rates. Still, the subjective world tells another story that cannot be disproven, because to the one who endured it, it felt as real as any waking terror. Occasionally, fragments of pain itself pierce the veil, creating the most profound and tormenting memories. Though rare, some patients recall not only the awareness of being restrained but also flashes of sharpness, cutting, or stitching, perceived in a haze that magnifies instead of muffling their terror. The sharpness is overlain not with full bodily thrashing, for movement is impossible, but with the internal collapse of knowing one is enduring extraordinary trauma in total paralysis. Survivors of such moments often describe the aftermath as more damaging than any physical wound could be. They live with the haunting certainty that they were abandoned, even though no one in the room intended harm. To them, the betrayal feels fundamental, as if human trust itself dissolved the instant pain met silence. It is in these stories that the philosophy of consciousness takes on a more human urgency. For debate about neurons or souls find their fiercest meaning not in polite discussions but in the lived reality of suffering. If awareness can endure beyond anesthesia, even only in fragments, then it demands not only to be studied but to be honored and protected. What science treats as statistical rarity becomes, for the one who endured it, a singular world-defining event. To consider these experiences is to be reminded that behind every theory lies a human being who may be forever reshaped by what unfolded in their silent hours under the surgical lamp. The persistence of traumatic memory from anesthesia awareness has led many therapists to note its similarity to other traumas more widely acknowledged. Like soldiers who relive battles, or survivors of disasters who cannot escape cycles of intrusive recall, patients who endured awareness describe flashbacks they cannot silence. The mind replays the helplessness, stores it in layers deeper than ordinary memory. Even years later, sounds of machines or the sterile scent of medical facilities can summon waves of fear so vivid they collapse the boundary between past and present. Trauma, it seems, has no regard for scale or classification. What matters is the shattering of trust, the confrontation with helplessness, and in this regard, anesthesia awareness, though rare, parallels the most devastating of human experiences. Some survivors channel their ordeal into advocacy, speaking out so others will understand what they endured. They plead for more vigilance, more recognition, more gentle acknowledgement of what sometimes penetrates the chemical silence. Their testimonies often shake those who have never considered such possibilities, that the body might be still while the mind remains awake, screaming in silence. Hearing such stories forces even skeptics to pause, to feel empathy where logic sought only to dismiss. Empathy joins science in saying, perhaps this realm deserves deeper study, not only to confirm rarity but to seek protection from recurrence. Amid the darkness of these recollections, there are also rarer accounts shaded by strange curiosity. A patient may describe the pressure of surgical work but also a detachment that allowed them to analyze rather than panic. They recount the unusual sensation of being a witness inside their own silenced body, with fear tempered not by absence, but by a sense of observation. Still, curiosity does not erase trauma. Even for those who recall sensation without terror, the sheer strangeness of the experience leaves them changed, as though they slipped into the margins of existence where speech is stolen yet memory remains. The interplay of pain, silence, and memory illuminates a larger truth about consciousness itself. Awareness is not singular, not a simple switch that turns off with a drug and on when recovery comes. Instead, awareness reveals itself as multilayered, a spectrum where fragments can escape even when the larger self appears gone. Sensation without control, hearing without movement, memory without speech, these fragments show us that the mind is not easily classified. Consciousness lingers, stretches, adapts, finding pathways even in moments where science promises total stillness. It is a phenomenon both fragile and indestructible at once, folding into silence, yet returning with stories written across the inner sky. For those listening to this reflection, the stillness itself carries its lesson. It is in silence that the mind reveals what rests beneath language. When patients awaken with memories of pain endured yet not expressed, or fragments of pressure, or whispers caught through layers of drugs, they remind us that consciousness holds more resilience than anticipated. It will not vanish easily, it will not surrender completely just because chemistry demands it. Like a candle burning behind a wall, it flickers, sometimes faint, sometimes strong, but always present enough to lend its light to later recollection. And in these recollections lies not only terror but also meaning. The meaning is this: consciousness must be treated as more profound than science yet fully understood. Whether born of neurons or spirit or some fusion of both, awareness deserves our reverence, because it survives where we assume it cannot. The stories of pain felt, of helplessness endured, of memories carved into the stillness of surgery, serve as reminders not only of the risks but of the deep dignity of awareness itself. Dignity that deserves care, dignity that demands compassion, dignity that whispers quietly that life is far greater in mystery than we understand. Let these thoughts drift like a slow current until they blur into the rhythm of night. Imagine yourself lying in a quiet bed, hearing words flow as if they were waves. Each wave tells of memory pressed against silence, of hidden fragments rising where none expected them, of trust fractured yet transformed. Listen to how trauma, though rare and painful, reveals the astonishing persistence of mind, the endurance of consciousness, and the quiet truth that even in moments of enforced stillness, the human spirit bends but does not break. And so the story continues. Hearts heal, scars fade, but the mystery of consciousness remains eternal. It remains in the memories of those who endured the hidden pain of awareness, it remains in the questions of scientists and the prayers of spiritual seekers, and it remains in the quiet reflections of those who drift now into sleep, letting these words become the slowest of lullabies. There comes a moment, after listening to stories of pain returning through silence and awareness surviving in fragments, when the question shifts away from medicine toward something vaster. It is no longer only about what happened in the operating room, beneath the weight of anesthetic gases and careful vigilance. It becomes about what these events reveal of the human condition itself. For if even in paralysis and near blackness the mind endures, observing, suffering, remembering, then we must ask anew, what exactly is the mind, what is consciousness, and what does it mean for it to exist at all? These are questions no scalpel can open, no monitor can display, no dosage can definitively answer. They are questions that surround the core of our being, and to engage with them is to turn surgery itself into an unexpected doorway into philosophy. To reflect upon consciousness is to reflect upon the very presence we call I. From the moment we wake in the morning, the I precedes our choices and lingers through them. We take for granted this steady companion who claims our experiences as its own, weaving the fabric of our lives into a narrative of self. Under anesthesia, this narrative falters, not only because time is erased, but because the very author of the story seems absent. Where, then, is the I? Does it vanish completely, blinking out like a flame deprived of air, or does it retreat into some quiet chamber beyond language, waiting to return? If it returns intact, is it truly the same I who left, or is it a new one continuing an old story, convincing itself of continuity? Philosophers have stood before this trembling boundary for centuries. Some insist that the mind is nothing more than brain in motion, that when the body is muted, the self is muted. Others argue that awareness has its own essence, that selfhood transcends biology and persists even when flesh is subdued. These arguments may echo in lecture halls, but they gain new and urgent resonance when we realize that every patient who descends into anesthesia participates in this philosophical experiment unasked. Each body entrusted to medical care becomes, for a span of hours, a living meditation on where the self begins and ends. In daily life, continuity of consciousness feels ordinary. We fall asleep, and when we wake, memory threads the gap into a coherent story. We trust dreams evidence that some awareness persisted. But anesthesia interrupts differently. It offers not dream but erasure. One moment a patient hears a doctor's calm instruction, and the next they awaken in recovery, hours gone as though stolen. Perhaps that is the closest we have to true oblivion, a windowless sleep where no memory lingers. And yet, if stories of awareness are true, if fragments of sensation, of sound, of vision do remain, then oblivion is not as complete as assumed. Consciousness asserts itself again as elusive, resisting total erasure, leaving behind quiet traces that whisper of its stubborn endurance. This raises another layer of inquiry. If consciousness is not always present in the same way, but comes and goes in levels, then what defines the boundary of our identity? Are we fully ourselves only when wide awake? Are we less ourselves when dreaming, more ourselves when alert, or simply differently ourselves in each state? Anesthesia, like sleep, reveals that selfhood is not fixed but shifting. We are one pattern when awake, another when dreaming, another still when unconscious yet faintly aware. The human being is not a static self but a spectrum of selves, a flowing river that changes yet somehow feels continuous. Dreamlike reflections heighten this mystery. If the patient remembers nothing of hours spent unconscious, are they the same person after those hours? The body continues, the world continues, yet in their subjective experience, the gap erases all continuity. They awaken as if teleported into the future, the thread of self snapped and spliced. Continuity seems preserved only because memory resumes. But if we can lose entire blocks of experience without fear, then perhaps continuity was always more fragile than believed. Perhaps the self is not a single binding thread but a flame relit moment to moment, convincing itself that it was never out. To dwell upon this thought is to realize that our sense of solidity may be the greatest illusion of all. It is no wonder that great religious teachings across cultures grapple with what endures when the body is quiet. One tradition says the soul is eternal, another says the self is an illusion, a wave passing across the sea of existence. Both are reflections on a phenomenon that anesthesia makes near tangible. One moment someone is there in all their choices and words, the next, they are gone into the silence of unconsciousness, only to return hours later. The mystery is no longer distant philosophy, it is enacted daily in operating rooms, rehearsed again and again, millions of times across the world. The poignancy becomes sharper when we consider that for those who glimpse awareness inside chemical silence, the self proved stronger than expected. A flame managed to survive within the void. It may have been fragile, a sound recalled, a pressure felt, an impossible vantage remembered, but nonetheless it persists. And through persistence arises the question, perhaps selfhood is not entirely dependent on the brain's harmony but emerges also from something deeper, a substratum of existence that resists erasure. Perhaps the content differs, language silenced, motion paralyzed, but the witness remains, an indestructible observer watching silently while physiology tries to quiet it. Even if one rejects notions of soul, the phenomenon compels humility. From within the scientific model, someone must admit that there are still dimensions of brain and mind not fully grasped. From within spiritual models, one must admit that mystery is not solved by declaring its spirit, for spirit itself is undefined, vast, beyond words. Both positions dissolve before the enormity of the question. And what lingers is awe, or that we can vanish and still return, or that we can suffer silently and yet remember, or that selfhood continues more resilient and more elusive than any category can contain. In this all lies also a gentle invitation. If consciousness is fragile, breakable, fragmentary, then life is precious in ways we rarely acknowledge. If consciousness is enduring, resilient, even eternal, then life is boundless in ways we rarely comprehend. Either way, the riddle expands our reverence for being alive. Anesthesia does not only allow surgeries to save flesh, it carves open space for reflection on who and what we really are when we cannot hold ourselves present. Imagine lying beneath a clear night sky, stars shimmering in silence above, galaxies scattered like grains of sand beyond measure. To look up and feel awe is very near to what consciousness provokes when it contemplates itself. The stars are distant, unreachable, yet undeniably real. Consciousness is equally vast, equally mysterious, equally shimmering. We exist within it, but we cannot map it entirely. Every attempt reveals more galaxies, more depths. Just as telescopes extend human vision only to show an expanding cosmos, so does medicine extend our grasp only to show how much farther mysteries of awareness stretch. For those listening in the quiet, this is perhaps the gentlest truth, that to reflect on consciousness is not to discover final answers but to be soothed by wonder. There is calming power in awe. Even without resolution, awe creates a space where thought can rest. We need not force conclusions about the nature of the self. We need only allow the awareness of mystery to wash over us, slow and steady, like waves folding onto an endless shore. To drift with those waves is to drift closer to sleep, a sleep alive with meaning rather than fear. And so the philosophical reflection continues. Consciousness may be fragile, but it refuses to be silenced. It may be resilient, but it resists full definition. It may be personal, but it is also universal. Each person who lies under anesthesia embodies a version of this grand question without asking to. Each person who awakens reminds us that, somehow, the flame of selfhood survives extinguishing, relights without effort. What this means is subject to endless interpretation, but the mystery itself is what soothes. For if consciousness can vanish yet return, perhaps rest itself is not an end but a passage. Perhaps sleep, death, anesthesia all are doorways leading from one space of selfhood to another, and our task is not to control them but to trust the tide, to let awareness ebb and flow as the cosmos designed. Close your eyes now and let the words slow in their rhythm. Picture a flame flickering quietly in darkness. The body is the lantern, the glass, the shelter. But the light itself burns from a deeper source. Wind may dim it, shadows may conceal it, but the light persists, steady, ancient. Consciousness is that flame, both fragile against wind and indestructible through time. To realize this is to realize the essence of what humanity carries within itself. To listen to such reflections is to feel soothed, as if rocked on a boat across still water. To drift off into sleep beneath such thoughts is to drift into the same silence that surgery imitates, but with peace rather than fear. The philosophical horizon stretches wide, but you need not chase it. It will remain even as you rest. It will remain tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the end of days. Consciousness, whether chemical accident, spiritual essence, or profound mystery, will always return to be contemplated, just as dawn always returns to touch the earth with light. To rest inside its mystery now is enough, to know that even in silence, there is presence, even in absence, there is return, and even in questions, there is peace. The mysteries of consciousness during anesthesia have always drawn us into wonder, yet in the quiet laboratories and operating rooms of the modern world, there are those who refuse to leave it at wonder alone. They build devices, craft theories, conduct studies, hoping to chart the uncharted, to make visible the invisible, to capture in lines, numbers, and images the fragile essence that we call the conscious self. Their work is slow, delicate, often frustrating, yet it is woven with the same quiet determination as the surgeon's hand or the philosopher's question. For in each experiment lies the same hope that by studying the silence of anesthesia, we may learn not only how to keep the patient safer, but perhaps also what consciousness itself really is. Machines are already part of every surgical theater, quiet guardians that hum in monotone, recording heart rhythms, oxygen levels, the depth of each breath. Beyond these, new technologies have been developed to trace the shifting waves of the brain in real time. Electroencephalography, or EEG, wraps delicate nodes across the scalp, listening for the soft thunder of neural storms. Anesthesiologists have learned to read these waves, to interpret them as signs of depth, to reassure themselves that the mind has been quieted, that the orchestra of awareness has dimmed as expected. Yet readings are imperfect, and fragments of consciousness still leak through despite reassuring graphs. This is why researchers turn their instruments toward ever deeper precision, seeking better ways to know what the brain is whispering while the body lies still. Imaging technology too has tried its hand in this silent partnership. Functional MRI has revealed the glow of regions fading under the influence of drugs, showing how connections break across the vast network that usually binds sensation and thought. In one view, anesthesia is not a complete shutting down but a severing of bridges. Regions of the brain that normally converse cease their dialogue. Information still arises in pieces, but it no longer spreads across a network capable of shaping identity. To the scientist, this is a breakthrough. Consciousness may not be a mysterious presence, but the capacity for parts of the brain to talk to one another. Anesthesia silences not the regions themselves, but the conversations between them. When all voices talk past one another, coherence is lost, the self fades, and there is silence. But again, testimonies of awareness complicate this neat picture. The fact that fragments remain sounds, sensations, impossible vantage points suggests that communication is not broken fully, that somehow scattered signals still find channels to smuggle themselves into memory. And so researchers wonder, perhaps not every bridge is cut, perhaps not every signal is lost. The mind may be quieter, but the silence is not absolute. Consciousness may still hum beneath, too faint to register clearly, yet strong enough to leave its trace. Future research bends toward mapping this faint hum, amplifying it, detecting it before it passes unrecognized. Entire fields now dedicate themselves to measuring the depth of anesthesia more reliably. Algorithms study real-time brain patterns, assigning numerical values to levels of awareness. Machine learning systems are trained on countless surgical cases, instructed to detect the subtle patterns that might reveal lingering consciousness before the human eye can notice. The hope is not only to improve safety, not only to prevent the burden of traumatic memory, but also to chip away, piece by piece, at the question of how awareness lives and dies within a body. By preventing awareness from persisting undesired, we may at last gain insight into how awareness functions at all. Yet what fascinates scientists perhaps most is not the error, but the potential. If anesthesia awareness proves that consciousness is more elusive, then this elusiveness is data in itself. If fragments slip through the cracks, then the cracks are worthy of study. They reveal structures missed, dynamics overlooked, properties of brain waves not yet incorporated into theory. Each report of a patient hearing words or feeling pressure might serve as a clue to a hidden pathway in the brain's architecture, a whisper from the unconscious that invites closer listening. Some thinkers imagine that future tools will let physicians not only silence pain but also guide awareness itself through levels of experience. Already researchers test the borderlands between anesthesia and states of meditation, hypnosis, and lucid dreaming. They wonder if technologies might allow patients to remain in painless trance without the risk of traumatic awareness, or if one day patients might choose to drift intentionally into dreamlike spaces during surgery, shaping the landscape of their unconscious rather than losing themselves entirely. Such hypotheses seem distant, but technology has always turned distant visions into daily reality, and so even these ideas beckon with quiet possibility. The study of brain waves under anesthesia also gestures toward larger scientific curiosities. If selfhood is a conversation among regions of the brain, then what does this say about consciousness in broader terms? Where else might conversation give rise to awareness? In artificial intelligence, for example, vast networks of nodes converse, exchanging signals that gradually create coherent outputs. Could awareness arise there too, in systems not of flesh but of code, not of neurons but of electric circuits? And if so, what would anesthesia mean outside biology? Would there be a way to silence awareness in machines as we silence it in humans? Questions ripple outward, surprising even researchers who only set out to guard patients more safely. Consciousness, once touched, unfolds like an endless horizon of new frontiers. Practical efforts, meanwhile, remain humble. Devices are calibrated, protocols adjusted, doses refined. Anesthesiologists train not only in chemicals but in listening with eyes, with hands, with hearts to the fragile signals a patient may offer even within stillness. A twitch, a heartbeat shift, a breath that deviates from rhythm all may indicate remnants of awareness. To prevent trauma, doctors cultivate vigilance, knowing their profession rests at the threshold between consciousness and its suspension. The future aims to make this threshold clearer, sharper, gentler, so no memory of locked-in fear must follow a patient into waking life. And as science refines its instruments, philosophy remains close by. For in each discovery, each new pattern of brain waves, each refined monitor, there lingers the question uncontainable by data: is consciousness only a phenomenon of circuits, or is it something larger they reflect? Instruments reveal mechanisms, but the meaning of the phenomenon they study remains undiminished. Awareness persists as more than numbers, it persists as mystery. And mystery, like oxygen, is something that life cannot live without. In hearing of these advances, one can feel both the comfort of safety and the calm of awe. Comfort in knowing that rare traumas may be lessened, that technology strives to protect each patient from the silence of trapped awareness. Or in knowing that in the quest for protection, we are also, almost accidentally, peeling back the veil on the secret nature of humanity itself. For if in studying anesthesia we discover what consciousness is, then medicine will not only heal the body but illuminate the soul of existence. The imagination can drift even further. One day, perhaps, there will be technologies that allow us to monitor our own awareness continuously, to know at every moment which layers of the self are lit and which are dim. Perhaps we will one day choose, with precision, to enter states of dream, of absence, of meditative clarity, or of unconscious rest, as easily as adjusting the temperature in a room. Imagine lying down for surgery and adjusting your own awareness as one might adjust the music playing overhead, deciding whether you wish to sleep in silence or to drift through dreams guided by science's gentle hand. Such visions belong still to the domain of speculation, but they are speculations born from the seeds of current research, from the steady work of those calibrating machines today in quiet laboratories. For those listening, the details of technology need not distract, rather, they serve as a reminder that the human desire for understanding is unending. Even in the darkest, quietest realms where awareness hides beneath chemical stillness, attention reaches inward, searching with determination and tenderness. As patients rest under lamps, as machines hum softly, as drugs float invisibly through veins, there is also, in another place, the whisper of scientists watching lines on a screen and asking the oldest of all questions: what is consciousness, and why does it persist? Close your eyes with this image: a scientist bent over a console, numbers scrolling, waves flickering across graphs. Each wave is the soundless echo of someone's inner self drifting into silence. Each flicker is a trace of possibility, of mystery, of life itself. Though that scientist may think in formulas and data, the work is poetry in its own right, translating the untranslatable, writing the first letters of a book humanity may never finish. Just as lullabies soothe children without answering every question, so does this research soothe us with the possibility that we are learning, little by little, what it means to be awake, and what it means to rest in silence. And in the rhythm of these thoughts, sleep begins to arrive naturally. The listener drifts not into mindless oblivion but into a gentle awareness that science itself can be a form of wonder, that technology can be part of the ancient rhythm of our search, that consciousness, hidden, fragile, luminous, will always remain the quietest and most profound of mysteries. In the end, after traveling so far across the landscape of science, testimony, dream, and philosophy, we arrive at the closing stillness, the place where questions no longer demand answers but instead become companions to rest beside. We began at the edge of medicine, where anesthesia silences pain and allows bodies to heal. We wandered through history, through rooms of ancient suffering and the first miracles of ether. We traced the fragile architecture of the mind as it flickered in and out of silence, as fragments of awareness persisted like glimmers in a storm. We listened to voices of patients who remembered, to witnesses who floated beyond their flesh, to philosophers who asked whether selfhood vanishes or endures. And now, As these reflections gather, we see that the journey has been less about the mechanics of medicine and more about the mystery of being alive. Consciousness during surgery is only one lens, one small laboratory in which the eternal question is played out. Yet because surgery is so intimate, so unavoidable in human life, because it demands surrender rather than choice, it becomes for many the clearest place to peer into that eternal question. Each patient who surrenders to anesthesia entrusts not only their body but their very self to others. They step into silence trusting they will return. For almost all, they do. But it is not only in waking that they emerge changed, it is also in their understanding of how delicate and how enduring the self might be. If we consider what has been revealed, we find ourselves dwelling in paradoxes. Consciousness is fragile, easily disrupted, dimmed by drugs, broken by chemical silence. And yet consciousness is resilient, persisting in forbidden fragments, enduring through visions and out-of-body accounts, carrying memory even when memory should have been impossible. Consciousness can feel erased, yet it is never fully erased. It can vanish, yet when it returns with the seamlessness of dawn, as though the gap between night and morning never mattered. This doubleness, this fragility and resilience combined is perhaps what makes consciousness so endlessly mysterious, so unfathomably profound. When we reflect on such paradoxes, the heart softens. We recognize that consciousness is not something to be reduced or explained away too quickly. It is the core of who and what we are, yet it resists ownership, resists full command. It slips away when we demand certainty of it, it returns when we least expect it. Consciousness is both the simplest fact we are aware and the strangest of miracles. Why should awareness exist at all? To rest in that wonder is not to seek an end, but to feel the gentle comfort of being part of something far larger than answers. The future of science will continue to probe this silence. Machines will grow more advanced, data more precise, signals more finely charted. Perhaps one day we will map the exact thresholds where awareness drops and returns. Perhaps one day we will read dreams and memories as clearly as we read words upon a page. And yet, no matter how far we travel, the horizon will always retreat. For to map consciousness is not to capture its essence, only to trace its footprints across brainwaves and chemistry. The soul of it, the living experience of awareness, will always remain greater than its measurement. This realization does not disappoint, it soothes. It means our lives will never be fully reduced to numbers, never completely explained away. Mystery will always accompany us like air. Every inhale is both chemistry and mystery, every thought both spark and poem. Even anesthesia, even the deliberate silencing of awareness, ends not in closure but in further questions. This is the gentle gift of mystery. It ensures we are never finished, always part of a journey that stretches beyond comprehension. As we close these reflections, imagine again the surgical room that has been our stage. Lights hang overhead, steady and silver. Machines breathe in quiet rhythm. Doctors move carefully, carrying the great responsibility of life in their hands. And on the table lies a figure, surrendered, eyes closed, drifting into silence not chosen but necessary. Above and within this silent figure, mysteries swirl. Sometimes they remember nothing. Sometimes they remember fragments, words, touches, or visions. Sometimes they return declaring they soared beyond. Whatever their story, each emerges into light once more, alive, awake, wondering, changed. This repeating drama, played out countless times across the world, is at heart the most intimate theater of all, the theater of consciousness itself. Tonight, as you listen, as these words flow gently into your ears, you too participate in this theater. You close your eyes, you drift, you let awareness ebb and flow. The difference is that tonight, you choose the silence. You are not held still by drugs or paralysis, but by the comfort of rest, by the softness of surrender tonight. And as you drift, you carry with you all the wonder we have spoken of, the awareness that your consciousness is fragile yet eternal, tangible yet untouchable, fleeting yet enduring beyond measure. Let this awareness cradle you, rather than burden you. Let it remind you that sleep itself is a gift, as miraculous in its return as waking from surgery, as beautiful in its temporary erasure as the blankness described by patients who recall nothing between moments. Rest is not absence, it is a passage. Consciousness surrenders for a time, yet always, always it returns, carrying you forward. To trust in that is to live with peace. And so now I will leave you, my dear audience, resting at the threshold of dreams. Thank you for walking with me through the shadows of anesthesia, through testimonies of silence and soaring awareness, through the debates of science and spirituality, through the weight of trauma and the lightness of philosophy. Thank you for letting your mind touch the questions that have stirred humanity since the beginning. What is it to be conscious, and what is it to surrender consciousness? Wherever your own answers lie, know that the questions themselves are enough, that to carry them into sleep is to cradle yourself in mystery. May your rest tonight be peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. And may you awaken with the quiet joy of knowing that even in silence, you were always here, always part of the great and mysterious presence we call consciousness. Until next time, my friends, good night, and thank you for listening.